What is up YouTube, it's Kingfisher745, and I want to welcome you back to the All Hail the King segment from podcasts past. In today's segment, I'm going to talk about one of the most frequently asked questions. The top 3 would probably be, who should I buy, how would you ISO a certain character, and then the question that we're going to cover, who are you currently using in PvP, specifically on defense. Now before we get into that, I want to invite you to check out thehelicarrier.com and blogtalkradio.com/FromTheHelicarrier. There you'll find current podcasts and more. Now as far as this look back, it is going to be different because rather than showing any of the teams that I mentioned in the segment, I'm going to go ahead and show you teams that either are or could be very useful on defense. That is, in the current PvP meta. I know that usually we take a look back to see if the older teams are viable, but PvP defense is a totally different animal. Teams rise and fall for a reason, and there's really no reason why I should tell you to use a defensive team that no longer works, or that is no longer top tier. I still think that this past podcast segment is very interesting because it tells us what was popular around a year ago today. And I'm not even kidding, it was originally recorded on March 4th, 2014. So the teams I'm going to be talking about were popular in the previous season, and then some at the current time. We will find a few familiar heroes there, and even a team or two that may work today. However, for the most part, things did start to change, at least a few seasons ago. And there's more of a trend of hardy defensive teams, rather than very fast win teams. Don't get me wrong, there are still a few, and I would kind of count Molly and Invisible Woman as both, but it more so relies on how her temper tantrum works, and it's usually accompanied by Invisible Woman and high health totals. So Null and Quicksilver would be the main high attack defensive team, and for them to work you have to get procs, and have your armory and hero bonuses set up properly. Anyways, this debate or topic could go on for a long time. The main aspect is today's segment's going to cover past defensive teams, and it's quite interesting to see how we've come along, and what teams have fallen by the wayside, and what teams or heroes still remain. So with that, let's get into the original audio. What's going on everybody, it's Kingfisher745, and this is the All Hail the King segment only on the From the Helicarrier podcast. Now for this week's segment, I want to talk about something I get asked about quite frequently. And that's, what are the best defensive teams? Or what team should I use on defense? This is often a really difficult question to ask, because it does matter what level you are, and what rating bracket you're in. And also, that's just a tip of the iceberg. It gets much more difficult to answer because I don't know what heroes you have, or what type of gadgets or weapons you have, or what your armory and hero bonuses look like. What I can and will do is go through a number of defensive teams that have been working, dating back to last season. So the first teams I'm going to mention had success last season, and may have some success this season. Let's start with Magneto and Quicksilver. This father and son team up pit two very good PvP characters together. We know that Quicksilver is amazing in PvP, and at times he appears to be on every single defensive PvP team. As far as his dad Magneto, he was an outstanding character that got even better when the Quick and Powered ISO 8 came out. Being able to use his shield as a quick action, plus the magnetized, and the potential for pretty large damage, makes this character very formidable in PvP, and that's without even mentioning his preemptive strikes. Next we have a personal favorite of mine, and that's Juggernaut and Quicksilver. These two by far had my highest win percentage on defense last season. They both use unarmed melee attacks, and you can just focus on boosting what they do best. Of course, the real problem comes when the opponent can lock out melee abilities. Debuffs such as Immobilize serve as this team's real weakness. Next there's Team Be Right Back, and that has Nico and Sabretooth. This team does well with exploit attrition, and also both characters come back to life and gain extra turns. And then the last team that I want to mention before I get into the current teams is none other than Quicksilver and the original costume War Machine. Now this is another team that many of you are probably familiar with by now. I myself was using them pretty early after the original costume was released. I even made a graphic for them, so I do plan on using them at some point in a video. But the appeal of this team is they're basically a buzzsaw. That was even going to be in the original name I had for this team. They absolutely shredded the opponent's team. If you got the right turn order on offense or defense, there was a very good chance that you were going to win the match. One of the most interesting things about this team is the fact that the Mystic would help shut down War Machine. The same thing goes for Dr. Doom, but with Pestilence hardly anyone is using the Mystic anymore, so that's something to bear in mind. Now moving on to the more current teams, Famine and Pestilence top off the list. I'm sure that most of you have seen an abundance of this team, and you definitely know what they're all about. So moving on to Famine and Deadpool. Deadpool's procs have been going crazy this season. He's constantly proccing Wine on the forums and forcing refreshes. In fact, one fight I got hit with Buggy twice on the same turn. Besides all of that, he also has a good chance to protect and counterattack. Then if you have the Horseman of Famine with her Infiltrator power, she ends up being a counterattacking nightmare as well. Place those two with a protecting agent who also has counterattack weapons, and you now have a team that's really scary to attack. Of course, the major weakness to this team would be off balance, and of course Pestilence can apply that. So moving on to our next team, it's Pestilence and Deadpool. You get all the added benefits of having Deadpool, plus none of his debuffs will be removed. Totally Broken becomes that much more deadly, and then on top of it, your Happy to See You is going to do huge numbers. Now those are all pretty solid teams, but these last two may be the hardest to beat right now. First, a team that I really haven't seen but I would think would be quite annoying, and that's Magneto and Pestilence. Just thinking of all the things I hate about these characters combined in one team, and maybe worst of all, a magnetized that can't be stopped or removed, plus weakened from an ISO 8 outbreak. It's going to be a long match at least. So basically what I'm saying is if you want to torture your opponents, you may want to try them out. Now for the final team, I've noticed it's been catching on a lot recently. This team, Havoc and Pestilence, I knew would do well as soon as I saw Havoc doing the plasma wave. So I threw them in on defense a few days ago, and ever since they've been winning a decent amount of defensive matches. The only bad news is every day I see more and more people using this team. When a team gets really popular like that, people are gonna find out how to beat them. It's only a matter of time. So that leads me to my final conclusion of the question, what's the best defensive team? My honest answer is it changes throughout the season, and you have to be willing to change with it. Thank you all for listening, and make sure you tune into the All Hail the King video segment. It'll be posted tomorrow. Now back to the show.